Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would talk about this little boxing news. I could maybe have made some other videos other than just this, but a couple of videos that I did overall try to make, either they cut out midway through because the videos were decently long, and they pretty much overall been the same topics that I've been doing overall for a decently long time now. So I decided, I don't know, maybe to hold back on those just for a little bit at the current moment, but there is going to be a very decent amount of fights, especially in that of the month of April. So I am going to more than likely do a hell of a lot more videos in that of the month of April because there's just so many different fights to predict. There's so many decent fights that are going down. I believe all in all that the Shakur Stevenson versus Oscar Valdez fight will be happening at the end of April. I believe all in all that Tyson Fury versus Dillian White will be happening. I believe that there's a couple of other fights as well. And then, of course, in the month of May, you have Gervonta Tank Davis returning. Of course, Mr. Sewell, Canelo Alvarez returning against that of Dimitri Bivol, which in my opinion may be fight of the year, at least at the current moment in time. But we'll see all in all what happens. Anyways, this one fight all in all that was most recently announced, which I do find very, very exciting. And all in all, this is going to be a fight between two of the best light heavyweights in the world. And of course, one of those fighters being Mr. Joe Smith Jr., who I believe at the current moment in time is the WBO light heavyweight title holder. He has won his past couple of fights. And then, of course, you have Mr. Artur Beterbiev, who pretty much, in my view, has been the main monster there at the 175-pound division pretty much ever since Sergey Kovalev has been watered down and ever since Andre Ward really left that division. Artur Beterbiev or Dimitri Bivol have pretty much been in the argument overall for being the best light heavyweight in the world. Now, of course, Canelo Alvarez, he's facing Dimitri Bivol basically in that next fight, so we're going to see, I don't know, who is the greater fighter there. But the bigger question is, overall, is Artur Beterbiev, is he going to defeat someone like that of a Joe Smith Jr.? Of course, what we know about Artur Beterbiev is that he's a very big puncher. He's a person, all in all, that has a very good amateur background, very big amateur pedigree. He's a person, all in all, that even though when you take a look at him in some of his bigger fights, sometimes he does look a little bit rough around the edges. But when you really get to see Artur Beterbiev, he is a very decent fighter. He's someone overall who's a very excellent counter puncher. He's a very excellent offensive force. He's a person that has A-grade power. Very, very, very big natural power. Very extreme puncher in the boxing ring when it comes down to it. And on top of that, Artur Beterbiev, he can box. Sometimes I don't think that Artur Beterbiev always necessarily has that of the greatest head movement. I don't always necessarily think that he always looks like Andre Ward or Roy Jones Jr. in there necessarily. But Artur Beterbiev, he does deserve a certain amount of respect. And if there is going to be a mega fight between either him and Dimitri Bivol or whoever the winner of that Canelo Alvarez fight is going to be, which I predict more than likely is going to be Canelo Alvarez, that is going to be a humongous fight. More than likely that fight between Artur Beterbiev and Canelo Alvarez more than likely is not going to happen this year because Canelo, it seems like he has a full plate, at least for the year 2022. It seems like the first fight that he is going to take is going to be that Dimitri Bivol fight. I more than likely predict that he's going to win that fight by decision, but you never know. We'll see what happens. Then after that, of course, Canelo Alvarez, apparently he has the Gennady Golovkin trilogy, which DAZN has been waiting for a very decently long time. And Canelo, you never know, he could take the Artur Beterbiev fight for the third fight this year. I just doubt that he will because I think Canelo takes a look at Artur Beterbiev as a very, very big legitimate threat. And he sees Artur Beterbiev pretty much overall being the very, very big cherry on top of an already illustrious career. I think that he takes a look at Artur Beterbiev the same way, basically, that, I mean, I really don't even know how to compare it. I guess all in all, basically, it would almost somewhat be, and in this sort of sense, Tom Brady's 7th Super Bowl ring. Canelo Alvarez, if you were able to actually beat that of an Artur Beterbiev, especially next year, and unify the light heavyweight division completely and have all the belts, basically, I think Canelo Alvarez would look at that as debatably the greatest accomplishment of his career, or at least debatably. And it certainly would be one of the greatest accomplishments of Canelo Alvarez's career. In my opinion, Artur Beterbiev, he is a person that is a debatably, really not even debatably in my opinion, a for sure top 20 pound per pound fighter. You're talking about a person that defeated the undefeated Alexander Gvozdyk when he was coming off of a knockout win over the long reigning Adonis Stevenson, even though Stevenson, of course, was a bit older, but still a very decent fighter. You're talking about a person that completely bent over Marcus Brown in that last fight. Now, Marcus Brown, of course, was coming off of a loss to that over somewhat of Jean Pascal, at least not too long ago. But it wasn't by knockout. It overall was a fight that had to be stopped, I believe, because of a headbutt or some sort like that. And Marcus Brown ended up losing a very slight marginal decision. Bottom line is this. A lot of people thought that Artur Beterbiev was going to have a lot of problems with that of Marcus Brown. But Artur Beterbiev, even though he had a little bit of problems with Marcus Brown in the first couple rounds, pretty much every round after the second round, he completely blitzed and dominated someone like a Marcus Brown. When I take a look at Artur Beterbiev, like I said, you can tell that maybe sometimes he's a little bit rough around the edges, but this man is a very, very big threat. And I said even several months ago, after I seen that Artur Beterbiev versus Marcus Brown fight, that if Canelo Alvarez is really going to have that much of a severe threat, even Dimitri Bivol, even though I would say that in certain movement categories and maybe defensive categories, maybe he would beat Artur Beterbiev in certain categories, but there's no way that he has the power or the bulk or the size of an Artur Beterbiev. And that's why if the Canelo Alvarez versus Artur Beterbiev fight were to happen when it comes down to it, that's why in my view that it would be such a mega fight. And I think a lot of people would truly be interested in that fight. Artur Beterbiev versus Canelo Alvarez would be a humongous fight. And I think that Canelo Alvarez, there's even a possibility that if he were to beat Artur Beterbiev, he may even possibly retire. Because Artur Beterbiev is a person that he's a boxer to where you don't really want to mess around with him all in all unless you're planning really to get a very, very big crowned achievement. Artur Beterbiev is a person that can take a lot of damage on you. He can put a great toll on you when it comes down to it, even if you do end up winning the fight. For those of you, of course, that remember the Andre Ward versus Sergey Kovalev fights. Andre Ward ended up winning those fights, but he ended up retiring after those fights because I think that those fights ended up pretty much taking out so much out of him that he said, you know what, I don't know if I really can do this anymore. I think overall that I still want to be a great family man. I want to be a great father, a great husband, overall to my wife and kids when it comes down to it. And I want to be there for them. I don't want to end up being in a wheelchair or overall, slurring my words, when I'm 40, 50 some years old. And I think Andre Ward, he took a look at that and he said, you know what? I think that I proved everything that I needed to prove. Let me retire today. Now, whether Canelo Alvarez will go down that same path or not, we'll see. All in all, what happens. More than likely, if Canelo beats out of an Artur Beterbiev, I believe that more than likely he'll continue on anyway because Canelo seems like a person that is pretty much focused on not even just becoming an all-time great fighter, but the greatest fighter, debatably in boxing history. And I think in order for Canelo Alvarez to do that, I think that not only will he have to defeat Dimitri Bivol and some of the other guys that maybe he could face potentially this year, but he is also going to have to defeat Artur Beterbiev. I think that Jamal Charlo and David Benavidez would also be great names to the resume. Demetrius Bouboundre could help out as well, in my opinion. And there might be a few other names that maybe I'm not naming. But those are pretty much the names, in my view, that Canelo Alvarez pretty much has remaining left that he has not fought yet. Now, of course, a lot of people, they'll say, well, you haven't really talked a whole lot about Joe Smith Jr. in this one. You haven't really overall talked about, how good do you think Joe Smith Jr. is going to do, or do you give him really that much of a chance? I really don't give Joe Smith Jr. that much of a chance over Artur Beterbiev. And it's no offense against Joe Smith Jr. I think that he's a decent fighter. I just don't think that he has an A-grade skill set. If he is an A-grade fighter, maybe you could rank him as an A- fighter. I don't even think that he's an A- fighter. I think that Joe Smith Jr., I would say that he's a solid B+ fighter. But you're talking about a person that at one point in time even lost to Sullivan Barrera quite dominantly in certain stretches. So Joe Smith Jr., he's a very decent worker. He's a person that has a great amount of heart. He can punch overall pretty much just as hard, as a horse kicks. But at the end of the day, Joe Smith Jr., I don't think that he has the technique. I don't think that he has the power. I don't think that he has the experience. And I don't think that he has the boxing IQ of what an Artur Beterbiev has. And more than likely, in my view, Artur Beterbiev is probably going to knock him out within about a maximum of 9 rounds. Joe Smith Jr., to be quite honest with you, in my view, he'll be pretty much lucky to even last that long. The bigger question that I have, all in all, is will Artur Beterbiev be able to defeat the main cash cow? Will he be able to defeat the main overall creme de la creme fighter? And we all know who that is. That's Mr. Canelo Alvarez, or whoever the winner of the Dimitri Bivol versus Canelo Alvarez fight is. I believe that more than likely that this fight is going to happen in 2023. I think that Canelo Alvarez, like I said, already has his plate full. I don't think that he plans to face Artur Beterbiev this year because there's a possibility that if Canelo were to face Artur Beterbiev for the third fight this year, that would lead to somewhat of exhaustion. I don't think that you can fight the first fight against Dimitri Bivol, have a second fight against Gennady Golovkin, even though he's not the same fighter what he used to be, but still debatably an A- fighter, and then face an Artur Beterbiev, someone that is really going to take all the energy and basically all the boxing ability that you have in order to beat him. I don't think that is going to happen this year. I think more than likely that Canelo, I think a good idea for him after that would either to face John Ryder or Lunga Makabu. I think that the fight that would attract the most amount of appeal between the two would be Lunga Makabu. Because Makabu, no, he's not looked at as an A-grade fighter, but Makabu is a cruiserweight champion, a legitimate champion. Not this fake champion bullshit where he's looked at as an interim champion or all in all, interim or something of a sort. Or, he's nothing like that. Intercontinental, he's a legitimate champion. Now, is he a person that, in my view, is an all-time great fighter or a great fighter? No, he's not. But if Canelo were able to win, a belt in a fifth weight class, that would mean a whole lot for his career. And I think that's what Canelo Alvarez is taking a look at right now. I think that Canelo Alvarez, at the end of his career, wants to be debated as not only a great boxer, I think he wants to be debated as the greatest boxer who ever lived. And I think that's why, more than likely, that I think not only Canelo is going to go after Dimitri Bivol, I think that he's going to get this Gennady Golovkin fight out of the way because DAZN basically wanted that fight to happen. So he says, okay, well, not only is this a way to kind of kill, overall the narrative that Gennady Golovkin was a superior fighter to me because he allegedly beat me in every, fight, or at least certain people will allege that. But on top of that, this is a great way for me to make money, and it's a decent opponent on my resume. So it's somewhat killing two birds with one stone. And then after that, of course, in my view, the best fight for Canelo, in my view, would be to face Alung Makabu, or Makabu, whatever the hell his name is. But at the end of the day, we'll see all in all what happens. But I'm very excited to see how this fight transpires. I'm very excited to see overall where Canelo goes from here, where Artur Beterbiev goes from here. And I think that if Artur Beterbiev versus Canelo does happen, if they get past their next opponents, which I do predict they will, there's no overall guarantee that they will, because of course this is the sport of boxing. And in any sport, really, when it comes out of any competition, you can never, ever allege that something is going to happen with 100% certainty. Really, you can't allege that anything is going to happen with 100% certainty, at least usually. But when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, I do believe that Artur Beterbiev is going to get past Joe Smith Jr., and I believe more than likely that Canelo will just have enough to get past Dimitri Bivol. The big question is, who is going to be the victor between those two? Or all in all, who is going to be remembered as the better fighter between those two if that fight does happen? Especially if there is no wagering. So that'll be very, very interesting to see. But anyways, that's pretty much what I thought that I would talk about at the current moment in time. Let me know overall what you guys thought about it, and I'll talk to you all later.